Dictation will start in 5 seconds. Start. In the court of competent jurisdiction, the present suit has been filed by the plaintiff seeking recovery of damages on account of an alleged breach of contract committed by the defendant. Stop. The brief facts of the case are that the parties had entered into a valid and binding agreement for the supply of certain goods within a stipulated period and on mutually agreed terms and conditions. Stop. It is the case of the plaintiff that the performed all his obligations in accordance with the terms of the agreement, whereas the defendant failed to fulfill his part without any lawful justification. Stop. The plaintiff further submits that repeated requests and legal notices were issued to the defendant calling upon him to comply with the contractual obligations, but despite such opportunities, the defendant neglected and failed to perform his duties. Stop. It is contended that due to such non-performance, the plaintiff suffered considerable financial loss and inconvenience for which the defendant is liable to compensate. Stop. On the other hand, the defendant filed a written statement contesting the claim of the plaintiff. Stop. It is submitted that there was no intentional breach on his part and that the alleged delay was caused due to unforeseen circumstances beyond his control. Stop. The defendant has also contended that the plaintiff did no fulfill certain essential conditions which adversely affected the performance of the contract. Stop. Accordingly, the defendant has prayed for dismissal of the suit. Stop. On the basis of the pleadings of the parties, the following issues were framed for determination whether a valid contract existed between the parties, whether the defendant committed a breach of the said contract, and whether the plaintiff is entitled to the relief claimed. Stop. Both parties were given adequate opportunity to lead evidence. Stop. The plaintiff examined witnesses and produced documentary evidence in support of his case. Stop. The defendant also led evidence in rebuttal. Stop. After hearing learned counsel for both parties and upon careful perusal of the entire record, this court proceeds to decide the issues. Stop. It is evident from the material on record that a valid and enforceable contract existed between the parties. Stop. The terms of the agreement were clear and unambiguous. Stop. The defendant has failed to establish any sufficient cause for non-performance. Stop. The plea of unforeseen circumstances has not been substantiated by any credible evidence. Stop. On the contrary, the evidence led by the plaintiff clearly establishes that he performed his obligations diligently and within time. Stop. Insofar as the question of damages is concerned, the plaintiff has placed on record sufficient material to show that he suffered losses as a direct consequence of the breach committed by the defendant. Stop. However, the quantum of damages must be reasonable and proportionate to the actual loss suffered. Stop. In view of the findings recorded above, this court is of the considered opinion that the plaintiff has successfully proved his case. Stop. Accordingly, the suit is decreed in favor of the plaintiff. Stop. The defendant is directed to pay the assessed amount of damages along with interest at a reasonable rate from the date of filing of the suit till its realization. Stop. The plaintiff shall also be entitled to the costs of the proceedings. Decree be prepared accordingly. Stop. File be consigned to the record room after due compliance. Stop. The parties are directed to strictly comply with this judgment within the prescribed period, following which the plaintiff shall be at liberty to initiate appropriate execution proceedings in accordance with law for enforcement of this decree and realization of the awarded amount. Stop.